So far, all the reformers we've talked about have been people who've broken away from the Catholic Church. But you will see a reform movement from within the Catholic Church. It's partly in response to the Protestants, but also comes from other Catholic leaders as well. And this we call the Catholic Reformation, or sometimes termed the Counter-Reformation. One of the key leaders of the Catholic Reformation was a guy named Ignatius of Loyola. Ignatius was a Spaniard who came from a noble family. Originally in his career, he was a soldier. And then one day after he was injured in battle, while he was resting, he read the Bible and a book on the lives of saints. And that led to a conversion that made Ignatius a really zealous leader. He became a priest and wrote a book called The Spiritual Exercises, where he described the spiritual life as really sort of the life of a soldier. Just like soldiers have to train and practice, Christians have to pray and sort of work their salvation every day. And his book, and as a priest, he gathered a lot of followers. And eventually Ignatius decides that he's being called to start a new religious order, a new group of monks and priests. And he went to the Pope, who approved this request. And this group became known as the Society of Jesus, and its members are often called the Jesuits. And this became really a very powerful religious, political, educational, and cultural force in Europe and beyond, because keep in mind this is while exploration and colonization is going on. The Jesuits really had three main goals. One of those goals was to educate. Jesuits saw the conversion of a lot of people to Protestantism as really a failure of education. They thought the beliefs of the Protestants were wrong, and they thought, the Catholic Church really provided strong answers to the Protestants. And they thought if people were better educated, maybe they'd be able to better defend their faith. So the Jesuits started building schools not only in Europe, but also in new places of exploration. So, for example, a lot of colleges in the Americas, like Boston College or Loyola University, of which there's several, were built by the Jesuits. Another goal was to convert non-Christians to Catholicism. And at this point, most non-Christians were outside of Europe. So the Jesuits went on missions all around the world. The first Christians in China and Japan and the Americas were usually Jesuit missionaries who were there to convert people. And they did a really thorough job. Unlike some people who went in and just sort of demanded people convert, Jesuits would learn local customs, learn the language, slowly kind of draw people to Catholic Christianity. And their third goal was to stop the spread of Protestantism by both converting people back who had already converted, but also convince people that Protestant ideas, weren't really the true Christianity. So the Jesuits became this pretty powerful force in trying to convert people back to Catholicism. While this is going on, while Luther and Calvin and these guys are doing their reforms, you do see an effort of response by the Catholic Church. Pope Leo X, the one who started all civil indulgences, died shortly after he excommunicated Luther. And later popes kind of have to put together, deal with what they saw as a crisis. So many people converting away from the church. So two popes, Paul III and Paul IV, over the course of about 20 years, hold this big conference called the Council of Trent, where they gather together all the church leaders to basically decide, okay, we need to argue as to why the church is correct and refute the claims of the Protestants. So most of what the Council of Trent does was to really explain the teachings of the Catholic Church. A lot of councils develop theology, they develop doctrine. This one really just solidified what they already taught. The council is often summarized as what was, is. So the church taught that you do need priests to interpret the Bible. You do need sacraments. You do need the authority of the church. You have to have faith and good works. In terms of indulgences, they actually said indulgences were valid, but they did say that you can't sell indulgences anymore, and that priests need to be focused on, salvation of souls and not so much their own personal wealth. So the Council of Trent really tried to consolidate the church's teaching and its authority while not actually changing any of the theology. One of the outcomes of the Council of Trent was a teaching about art. They looked at the art that had been around during the Reformation. Mostly we're talking about Renaissance art, and they saw it as maybe one of the problems that was making people turn away. If you were, say, you're an average Christian who's traveling to Rome or Florence in Italy to see these beautiful things of art, and you see Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel painting. First thing you notice is well, everyone's naked. Wasn't expecting that. And other things like that made some church leaders feel like maybe the art needs to be look more religious. So you have this declaration here where they sort of say that we need to make art that is not disorderly or unbecoming or confusedly arranged and not profane or indecorous. And this really leads to a new art movement called the Baroque style, which is associated with the Catholic Reformation. One sort of value in the Baroque style is movement. Unlike some of the more stiff, classical inspired art, you see a lot of movement in this one, where you've got church driving at heresies. It's also meant to lead one towards emotion. Remember, a lot of people still can't read. So while Luther's telling everyone they need to read the Bible, the church argues that, well, you can go to the priest to teach you what the Bible says. But if you really want to kind of feel what the truth of the church is, you should look to some of this art. Another good instance here is El Greco's painting, Penitence of Peter. El Greco actually was before the Baroque movement, but he's part of the Catholic Reformation art movement. And you can see, the sort of the emotion it draws here. Not so much classically inspired as it is inspired by the teachings of the church and what's in the Bible. Another artist, Caravaggio, one of the early Baroque artists, used a lot of the same Renaissance techniques, but again, he's using it less classically inspired and more inspired by Christianity. As a comparison, here is another David, this one by Bernini. You might remember Michelangelo or Donatello's Davids. They were nude, they were done in this classical style. Bernini puts David in the midst of loading the sling to slay Goliath. And so you can kind of see the emotion and the movement in the statue. This is it from three different angles here. In terms of the actual effects of the Catholic Reformation, in a lot of ways it was somewhat successful. At the height of the Protestant Reformation, you could see all the places in color were Protestants of some bent or another. By the middle of the 17th century, a lot of places had converted back. Part of this is also a number of wars that came afterwards that just decimated populations across Europe. But about a third, by best estimate, somewhere between a quarter and a third of the people who converted to a Protestant religion, by the end of the 17th century, had converted back. So you could see how the the Catholic Reformation was successful in some of those goals, but nonetheless, you do still have a Europe divided as a result of these religious changes.